The car picking me up was a sleek, glossy black sedan, so long I thought it could carry an entire football team. The driver, clad in a suit, bowed to me with a reverence that was hard to comprehend. It was as if I were a living Buddha statue rather than a 26-year-old girl, fresh off a long-distance train, still wearing a sweater with frayed cuffs. "Miss, please get in. The old master is waiting at the manor." Mississippi. I repeated the word in my head and almost laughed. In my 26 years of life, no one had ever called me by that flowery title. People called me Auditorchen, or that annoying brat who specialized in nitpicking their ledgers. Some called me by much nastier names after I exposed their missing funds. But Miss? Never. I got into the car, sat down on the soft leather that smelled of money, and began doing what I had done my whole life, observing and calculating. Here is how it happened. 3 weeks ago, a man claiming to be the butler of the Shin family showed up at my rented apartment. He brought a thick dossier and a story that would have made anyone else faint from sheer joy. He claimed I was the long-lost biological granddaughter of old Master Shin, the head of one of the foremost illustrious great families in the north. That years ago, my mother left home over an unapproved marriage, gave birth to me, and died early. And now, after years of searching, the family had finally found me. It sounded touching. But I am not the type to be easily touched. My profession taught me one thing: when a number that looks too good to be true appears in the ledger, what you need to do is not celebrate, but flip through every single voucher behind it. So my first question wasn't what my grandfather looked like, but, why now? The answer came immediately from the dossier, cleverly packaged amidst flowery rhetoric. The Shin family had recently hit a streak of bad luck, several deals fell through, a major project was stalled. The old master had fallen ill, and a highly respected feng shui Taoist priest the family revered had decreed that to break the curse, they must find a highly blessed woman of legitimate bloodline and bring her back to the manor. According to the astrological chart calculated by the Taoist, that person was me. Reading this, I immediately understood my position on this chessboard. I wasn't being welcomed back as a family member. I was being brought back as a talisman. A walking, breathing feng shui object expected to radiate some sort of lucky aura to revive a tottering empire. A normal person hearing this might feel pity for themselves. I just felt curious. Because in all my years of scrutinizing cash flows, I have never believed that a talisman could save an enterprise. The thing that saves or kills an enterprise is always cash flow. And wherever someone claims that amulets can cure bad luck, there is usually a cash flow leaking somewhere that is very much worth a closer look. So I agreed to return. Not because I believed I was some lucky charm, but because I wanted to see who was truly benefiting from that belief. The Shin Manor was located in the oldest villa district in the northern capital. Behind an iron gate so high you had to crane your neck to see the top, nearly 20 servants stood in 2 neat rows as the car stopped. And in the middle of the hall, under a sparkling crystal chandelier, a whole group of people was waiting for me. Here are the key players I observed within my first 3 minutes. Old Master Shin, an old man sitting in a grand chair, hair white, his face etched with the wrinkles of power and exhaustion. He looked at me with a complex gaze, anticipation, scrutiny, and hope. The hope of a drowning man grasping at any straw. Pathetic. A man who had built this entire empire, now placing his life or death faith in a horoscopic chart. Taoist Master Xuanjin, standing next to him, half a step back, was a man in a gray robe, his hands rolling wooden prayer beads. His eyes swept over me swiftly, and in that fleeting moment, I caught the look of someone appraising an item, calculating whether it would cause trouble for his business. The very man who personally decreed I was the lucky charm was the one most annoyed to see me walk through the door. Xin Yiting, the third person, stepped forward with the brightest smile, arms wide open as if we were long-lost sisters. "Cousin, you're finally home." "I'm Yiting, I've been looking forward to this day for so long." Her voice was sweet as honey. But while her mouth smiled, her eyes swept me from head to toe, pausing at the frayed cuffs of my sweater and my faded canvas shoes, before a flash of relief crossed her eyes. The relief of someone who had just sized up their rival and realized the rival dressed worse than their own maids. I smiled back at her politely, while making a mental note. Xin Yiting, the niece raised to play the role of the heiress during all the years I was absent. The person with the most to lose. So, I had narrowed down two things. First thing, the Taoist who declared me the lucky charm didn't want me here. Second thing, the cousin who outwardly revered me also didn't want me here. Two people with reasons to push me away, yet one of them was the very person who dragged me back. A beautiful contradiction. And I knew every beautiful contradiction always had a hidden cash flow behind it. The welcome dinner was laid out as grandly as a ritual. A long table draped in pristine white cloth, porcelain dishes translucent under the lights, and all the important figures from the four great families, Shen, Liu, Meng, and Pei. I sat near the old master, treated as an honored guest, while still clearly feeling dozens of eyes weighing me like an item in a pawn shop. The opening act belonged to Yiting. She lightly tapped her crystal glass to draw attention. Cousin, I heard you had a hard time living in the countryside before. But our Shen family bloodline has always valued talent. Since the whole family is gathered, why don't we sisters play a little game for fun, so the elders can see your brilliance? A soft murmur rippled across the table. I saw the corners of Taoist Xuanzhen's mouth twitch upward slightly. So this performance was prearranged. What game? Speak up, I replied leisurely, putting my chopsticks down. Yiting smiled, a glint of premature triumph in her eyes. It's simple. Our family is about to reallocate some shares in the central fund, and there's a small math problem that even the advisory board is having headaches over. I think a blessed woman like you must have been gifted a brilliant mind by the heavens. Why don't you try calculating it, to bring some good luck to the family? This was a vicious move. Underneath the lucky game facade was a trap packed into 3 layers. Layer 1, if I refused, I'd be exposed as an ignorant country bumpkin. Layer 2, if I calculated incorrectly, I would be labeled stupid and unlucky, the jinx title arriving ahead of schedule. Layer 3, regardless of whether I was right or wrong, she had already planted the impression that I was just a provincial girl being put to a test, an underdog right from the start. A trap with brains. I nodded inwardly, at least this cousin didn't disappoint me with mediocrity. They brought out a small whiteboard with the problem written on it. It was an equity valuation problem, filled with numbers regarding overlapping ownership percentages between subsidiaries, cross-debts, and a mess of profit-sharing conditions. It was exactly the kind of problem that would make an advisory board argue for 3 days. But for me, it was just the work of a normal Monday morning. I didn't need pen or paper. I just looked at the board, and in my head, the numbers fell into rank and file like soldiers waiting for roll call. I began to speak, my voice as calm as if reading a menu. If calculated the way you are proposing, the equity for this branch will yield a certain number. But that number is wrong. The entire table fell dead silent. Yiting froze for half a second, the smile on her lips stiffening slightly. What do you mean, wrong? This is how the advisory board calculated it. That's exactly why I said the advisory board calculated it wrong, I replied without any haste. You all forgot a cross-loan between 2 subsidiaries. When both companies are under the same ownership branch, that debt must be deducted before valuing the equity, otherwise the dividend is double counted. This inflates the equity of the other branch, while suppressing this branch's share below its true value. The discrepancy is not small. If someone signs this allocation plan, someone will profit and someone will suffer a loss without even knowing it. I recited the correct number clearly, digit by digit, then looked up straight into Yiting's eyes and added softly. This problem isn't difficult, it was just designed so that the person miscalculating wouldn't realize they were wrong. Who drafted this question for you, Yiting? The atmosphere in the room thickened. I clearly saw Yiting's face turn pale for a moment before she tried to regain her composure, but the hand holding her glass trembled slightly. She didn't expect that the trap she laid to expose me would inadvertently allow me to point out that the very allocation plan the family was about to sign was flawed. And a skewed allocation plan doesn't just skew itself naturally. Someone drafted it. My last question was like a needle hitting exactly that nerve. At the head of the table, a few elders from the Lu and Meng families began to frown and whisper to each other. They didn't care whether I was a lucky charm or not. They had just heard the two words that make any businessperson prick up their ears: suffer a loss. Old Master Shin, who had been quietly observing, suddenly spoke up, his voice deep and slow. "Where did you say that Crossloan is located?" I told him, accurate down to the specific subsidiary. The old master remained silent for a long time, then turned to look at the financial advisor sitting a few seats away. The advisor's face lost its color, and he stammered incoherently. That reaction alone was enough for the whole table to understand that I was right. And in that silence, I caught Taoist Master Xuanzhen's eye. He was no longer rolling his prayer beads. He was staring at me intently. This time, I could read it more clearly than ever. It wasn't the look of someone witnessing the manifestation of a blessed woman. It was the look of an old fox realizing the prey he lured into the cage wasn't a sheep, but something with fangs. I raised my water glass and smiled faintly at him. "Taoist master, you proclaimed me a lucky charm, so I will stay and be a very good lucky charm for this family. I just fear the luck I bring won't be what you're expecting." The banquet ended in a bizarre atmosphere. Yiting claimed she was tired and retreated early. The Taoist also took his leave. As for me, a servant led me to a spacious room on the second floor. Everything was brand new and expensive, as if prepared for an honored guest whom people didn't know whether to love or guard against. But I didn't sleep right away. The whole evening had given me too much to think about. I turned off the lights, sat by the window looking down at the pitch-black garden below, and began piecing together the puzzle. A wealthy family suddenly hitting a streak of bad luck. A Taoist appearing right on cue, decreeing that money must be spent to ward off misfortune. A skewed asset allocation. An adopted granddaughter with too much to lose. A hidden cash flow leaking into a pocket I couldn't yet see. It wasn't enough to draw a definitive conclusion, but enough to know I had stepped into exactly the right place. It was late in the night. I was about to go to sleep when I heard very faint footsteps in the hallway. I have always been sensitive to sounds that shouldn't be there. I stepped close to the door and held my breath. Out there, a few steps from my room, was Taoist Xuanzhen's voice, lowered to a near whisper. "That brat is not simple. The longer she stays, the more troublesome it gets. I've calculated it. Before the full moon, we must make the whole family believe she is a jinx, not a lucky charm. Can you handle this?" And the voice that replied, the same one that was so sweet earlier, now icy cold, was Yating's. "Rest assured, Taoist. Turning a lucky charm into a jinx isn't hard at all." I stood in the dark behind the door and unconsciously smiled. So that was it. They planned to turn me into a disaster for the whole family to drive me away, or worse. A neat plan. They only miscalculated one thing. They thought they had just lured a sheep to the slaughterhouse, but the person who walked through the Shin family doors tonight had never been anyone's prey in her entire life. This game of turning blessings into disasters they are about to set up, I will play along. Only, the one deciding who is the blessing and who is the disaster at the end of this game, will be me. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual and discovered that being a lucky charm in a rich household came with its own miseries. They didn't leave me in peace. As soon as I opened my eyes, a servant brought in a lavish breakfast tray, along with a message that the old master invited me to join the family for breakfast. I looked at the exquisite tray, thought about the conversation I overheard last night, and muttered to myself, "I'm afraid this breakfast will serve more than just food." Sure enough, when I went down to the dining room, the atmosphere was completely different from the night before. Last night was a grand welcome banquet. This morning, the tension was as tight as a bowstring. Faces were pale, heads bowed and whispers. I walked in, and all eyes fixed on me. But this time, there was no curiosity. Instead, there was something I was all too familiar with, suspicion. Yiting sat next to the old master, her face feigning a pitifully worried expression. As soon as she saw me, she spoke loudly enough for the whole room to hear. "Cousin, you're awake. Did you hear what happened?" "What happened?" I asked, pulling out a chair and sitting down casually. "Last night, right after you arrived at the manor, the company reported that the deal with the Shengyuan group fell through. It was the biggest contract of the quarter, cousin. 3 years of negotiations, and suddenly the partner withdrew without any warning." She sighed, her eyes glancing quickly toward Daoist Xuanjun, who sat silently in the corner. "And that's not all. This morning, Grandpa wasn't feeling well. His blood pressure spiked. The doctor just had to come over and check on him." I took a sip of tea without saying a word, but in my head, I started counting. A contract negotiated for 3 years suddenly falls through the exact night I arrive. The old master, who was fine, suddenly falls ill the very next morning. Both incidents happened right after I stepped through the door. This wasn't a coincidence, it was a script. And this script had a very obvious screenwriter, the man rolling his prayer beads in the corner, waiting for the right moment to speak. But this script was clumsy in one aspect. Just yesterday they brought me in as a lucky charm to break the curse, and today the family was unluckier than ever. Either their lucky charm was fake, or this bad luck was orchestrated. The Taoist was smart enough to understand this contradiction, so he surely had a way to patch it up. Just as I guessed, Daoist Xuanjun cleared his throat and slowly stood up. The whole room instantly fell silent, as if he were the only one with the right to speak at this moment. This poor monk didn't want to bring this up, but it has come to this, and I must speak. He clasped his hands, his face feigning deep distress. A few days ago, while casting the hexagrams, I saw an unsettling sign, but I was unsure and didn't dare to say it. Now it is clear. At first glance, this young lady's astrological chart shows immense prosperity, but hidden deep within is a very heavy, ominous aura. A person like this, if her fate aligns with the head of the household, brings great fortune. But if it clashes... He left the sentence hanging, letting the silence do the rest of the threatening work. Brilliant. I had to admit he was brilliant. In just one morning, he completely flipped the chessboard. Last night, I was the lucky charm the whole family awaited. This morning, using the exact same mouth that crowned me, he began turning me into a jinx. And the beauty of this trick was that it required no evidence. It only required fear. When people are panicking over lost money and illness, they will cling to any explanation, even the most absurd one, as long as it gives them a scapegoat. And the scapegoat, naturally, was me. I saw several elders looking at me with apprehension. Some discreetly shifted their chairs away. Yiting lowered her head to hide her curling lips, while the old master sat there, his face exhausted, torn between the newly kindled familial bond and the fear they had just planted in his heart. A normal person cornered like this would probably stand up and frantically defend themselves, swearing they carried no ominous aura. But defending oneself is a poor strategy. The more you defend yourself against the invisible, the more people believe it's real. Arguing with a prophecy is a fool's game. A smart person looks for the tangible things behind that prophecy. So, I didn't defend myself. I simply put down my teacup and asked a very ordinary question. Taoist master mentioned the contract with Shengyuan fell through. I'm just a bit curious, how exactly did the partner notify us of their withdrawal? By phone call or official document? The seemingly harmless question made the Taoist freeze for a beat. He didn't expect me to ask about that instead of trembling over my own ominous aura. What does that have to do with the astrological chart? He frowned. It has nothing to do with the astrological chart, I replied, my voice still feather-light. But it has everything to do with the contract. A contract negotiated over 3 years doesn't just evaporate. It always leaves a paper trail. I just want to see that paper trail. The financial advisor I had exposed yesterday, now sitting at the far end of the table, blurted out, perhaps wanting to reclaim a shred of dignity. The partner sent a formal document via email last night, stating that because we unilaterally changed the payment terms, they could not proceed. Is that so? I nodded slowly. Changing the payment terms means our side must have sent them the new terms first, so they would have something to react to. May I ask who sent those new terms, and at what time? The room fell dead silent. This was the exact point where their entire script began to crack. Because to stage a collapsed contract, they had to make the partner believe the Shin family had turned their backs on them. To do that, someone on the inside had to send a falsified document of terms, deliberately provoking the partner. And if it was sent, there had to be a digital footprint, a sender's address, a timestamp, a server log. No prophecy in the world could erase those traces. The advisor was stunned. He flipped through the dossier in front of him and stammered, the terms were sent from the sales department's account at 11 p.m. last night. 11 p.m.? I repeated, then smiled. How interesting. Because at 11 p.m. last night, I was sitting at a banquet in the very next room, along with everyone here. The sales department was empty. So who used the sales department's account to send a document capable of enraging our partner, at an hour when no one was supposed to be there? I paused, letting the question hang in the air. And one more thing. The partner claimed we unilaterally changed the terms. But as far as I know, when a massive corporation like Shangyuan receives an abnormal alteration in the middle of the night, the first thing they do is not pull out immediately. The first thing they do is call to verify. That is standard protocol for any major deal. So the real question is, did someone block that verification call? Or did the partner call, and whoever picked up deliberately confirmed that the fake terms were real? My questions acted like a scalpel, slicing open the shroud of bad luck they had draped over the incident, revealing that underneath it was not fate, but human hands. Daoist Xuanzhen's face could no longer maintain its initial smooth composure. He hadn't anticipated dealing with a girl who, instead of crying and defending her innocence against ominous auras, would calmly trace back email timestamps. Yating turned pale, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. I knew I had hit the mark, but I also knew it wasn't time to deliver the crushing blow. I had only proven that the contract failure was staged, I hadn't yet proven whose hands staged it. And in a war like this, launching a strike that isn't fatal is more dangerous than not striking at all. It only makes the enemy more vigilant and careful in hiding their tracks. So I stopped at the perfect moment, closing with a gentle, almost harmless sentence. I just think that before we believe in ominous auras and bad luck, maybe the family should check who was sitting in the sales department at 11 p.m. last night, lest we falsely accuse the heavens. A few elders from the Lu and Meng families nodded. My logic was so sound that no one could refute it. The tide, which had heavily favored the Daoist moments ago, was turning. At the very least, the jinx label was halfway ripped off my forehead before it could fully stick. But I underestimated my opponent. After a brief moment of fluster, Daoist Xuanzhen suddenly regained his calm. And he did something that made me secretly admire his cunning. Instead of arguing about timestamps, a battle he knew he'd lose, he immediately shifted the war to a front my logic couldn't reach. The young lady is indeed intelligent, he said, clasping his hands, his face returning to a terrifyingly serene expression. But this poor monk fears that this exact overbearing, sharp intelligence is the clearest manifestation of the ominous aura. A person with a truly prosperous fate is gentle and benevolent, bringing peace and warmth. But someone who, the moment she returns home, digs up drama, sows suspicion among relatives, and causes everyone from top to bottom to feel insecure and distrustful of each other, tell me, is that a blessing or a disaster? I froze for a second. Not out of fear, but out of surprise at the mastery of this counterattack. He didn't bother arguing the evidence. He twisted my act of exposing the truth into evidence to condemn me. The sharper I proved myself to be, the more I looked like a jinx sowing discord in the eyes of these panicked, superstitious people. He turned my greatest strength into a fatal weakness. This wasn't the trick of a common street fortune teller. This was the move of a master manipulator of human psychology. And he succeeded. I saw the eyes of several elders waver. Even the old master frowned, his gaze toward me flickering with hesitation. The atmosphere tilted once again. Right then, the old master wearily rubbed his forehead and spoke with the heavy voice of a conflicted man. Enough. I will have someone investigate the contract thoroughly. Then he looked at me, his eyes a mix of pity and apprehension. Vivi, you just got back, you're not used to things here. The family's business and finances are very complicated. Don't interfere for now. Just rest and get your health up. Let the adults handle things. That sentence, though wrapped in concern, was a de facto gag order. I was stripped of the right to touch the family's finances, my most potent weapon. The Taoist's counterattack had achieved its goal. He didn't need to prove I was a jinx, he only needed to make the old master worried enough to tie my hands. Yiting sat beside him, the corner of her mouth curling up again. She thought she had just won. But this was the most interesting part of the entire morning. Because while everyone thought I had been backed into a corner, I had just seen a door crack open. All morning, what bothered me wasn't the collapsed contract or the old master's illness. What bothered me was the Taoist's mention of spending money to ward off bad luck. I knew for a fact that such an elaborate script of bad luck wasn't staged just to drive me away. Driving me away was just the tip of the iceberg. The root, the true motive, always lay where the money flowed out. And money only flows out when the whole family is terrified enough to open their wallets for major rituals. In other words, they needed the entire family to panic. And for the entire family to panic, this bad luck drama was merely the prologue. There would be more, bigger disasters orchestrated. And every time a disaster was staged, they would have to spend money on rituals and offerings. Every single penny of that had to pass through the ledger. It all leaves a trace. I just needed to see that ledger. So, when the old master finished speaking, I didn't show any resentment. On the contrary, I stood up, smiled obediently, and said something that left the whole table bewildered. Grandpa is right. I am still unfamiliar with things. It is true I shouldn't interfere in big matters. I won't touch the company's finances anymore. I paused for a moment, then looked over at the Taoist with the most sincere expression I could muster. But I heard the family is going to hold many rituals to ward off bad luck for Grandpa and the whole family. As a granddaughter, and someone reputed to have a prosperous fate, I want to contribute a little effort. I request to help record the ledger for ritual offerings and purchases, to show my sincerity. This surely isn't complicated business, just family spiritual matters that I can handle. Taoist master, would that be convenient? The entire table breathed a sigh of relief, assuming the stubborn niece had finally learned her place and retreated to doing harmless, menial chores. The old master nodded, seemingly pleased by my obedience. Yiting almost laughed out loud, clearly thinking I had surrendered and accepted the role of an errand girl writing down incense expenses. Only Taoist Xuanjin wasn't smiling. He looked at me, a flash of wariness in his eyes. He felt something was off, but couldn't pinpoint it immediately. Refusing this deeply sincere offer in front of the whole family would be too obvious, tantamount to confessing that the offering ledger was shady. But agreeing meant letting a fox straight into his very own henhouse. He was caught between a rock and a hard place. It was the exact same trap Yiting had set for me last night. The only difference was that this time, I was the one setting the board. In the end, he had no choice but to clasp his hands and force a stiff smile. The young lady's sincerity is the family's fortune. Yes, I bowed respectfully, hiding the upward curl of my own lips. I will certainly record everything very carefully. Every single penny, every single dime. I won't let a single expense slip by. every single penny, every single dime, without missing an expense. That was the catchphrase of an auditor when opening a new set of books. Only, no one in this room knew that. They thought they had just tied my hands, little did they know they had just handed me the exact key I needed. The right to look at the cash flow. As breakfast ended, I walked out of the dining room feeling lighthearted. Behind my back, I knew the Taoist was watching me. And for the first time since I stepped into this manor, he probably started sleeping poorly. Outside, the sun was rising. A new day for the Shin family, with its scheduled bad luck, had just begun. But I already had work to do. People often think power lies in the highest chair in the boardroom. But after years in the profession, I know a different truth. True power lies with whoever holds the ledger. The person in the highest chair only sees the numbers people want him to see. The person holding the ledger is the one who knows where the money truly goes. And from that morning on, thanks to the kindness of the entire Shin family, I became the ledger holder. The job of assisting in recording ritual offerings sounded trivial. Day after day, I followed the logistics manager, recording every single expense for the curse-breaking rituals the Taoist devised. Money for imported southern incense, money for requesting statues, money for paper offerings, wages for the minor monks following the Taoist, money for repairing the altar. Every number was startlingly large. In just 3 days, the amount spent on rituals equaled the annual salary of dozens of workers combined. An ordinary person looking at that pile of expenses would just feel dizzy. But I saw a picture slowly emerging. Because money is like water, it always flows according to gravity. You only need to patiently trace it upstream, and sooner or later, you will reach the reservoir where it all collects. And I had plenty of patience. I started noticing a small detail. The vast majority of the expensive offerings were purchased from a few fixed suppliers, an incense merchant, a statue casting workshop, and a premium paper offering manufacturer. These 3 names appeared repeatedly in the ledger. A normal person would think the Taoist just had familiar connections and bought from trusted places for peace of mind. But my professional eye lingered there a bit longer. Because the prices from these suppliers weren't just slightly above market value, they were several times higher. A bundle of regular incense worth a few dozen bucks was recorded as several hundred. The price of a wooden statue was inflated to absurd levels. A price discrepancy is always the first sign. When someone is willing to pay 5 times the real price for an item, either that person is stupid, or the price difference is flowing right back into the buyer's own pocket. And a Taoist cunning enough to manipulate an entire great family is certainly not stupid. I needed to know who those 3 suppliers were. So that night, I did what any auditor would do when spotting a suspicious vendor. I traced back their ownership. This would have been very difficult if not for an unexpected friend. That afternoon, while I was sitting alone in the study with a pile of invoices, a young man knocked on the door. He was dressed neatly in a suit, composed, holding a file. I had seen him briefly at the welcome banquet and vaguely remembered him as the family's young legal counsel. Lu Chinzhou. Miss Vivi. He nodded in greeting, his voice deep and clear, the kind of voice belonging to someone used to weighing every word. I heard you are in charge of recording the ritual ledger. That's right. Can I help you with something, Counsel Lu? He didn't beat around the bush. He placed the file on the table, pushed it toward me, and said something that made me look at him twice. Ever since that Taoist appeared, I've always felt something was wrong. But I am an outsider, working in law, with no excuse to interfere in the family's spiritual matters. Hearing you ask about the email timestamp this morning, I knew there was finally someone in this house who sees things the way I do. He tapped lightly on the folder. These are the legal records of the companies related to the ritual suppliers. I think you'll need them. I looked at him, then at the file. In my profession, you are taught to always suspect gifts that arrive too perfectly on time. When someone suddenly hands you exactly what you need, they are either an ally or setting a more sophisticated trap. But I looked into his eyes and saw something hard to fake, the genuine frustration of an upright person forced to witness fraud without being able to do anything about it. I understood that frustration, because I had carried it my whole life. Thank you, Counsel Liu. I pulled the file closer. But you should know, standing on my side right now isn't safe. He smirked, a very brief, fleeting smile. Practicing law for 20 years, I'm more used to standing on the side of evidence than the side of safety. Then he left, leaving me with the dossier. And when I opened it and cross-referenced it with what I had recorded in the ledger, the blurry picture of the past few days suddenly became chillingly sharp. Those 3 expensive suppliers had 3 different names on paper, 3 different owners, 3 different addresses. At a glance, they were entirely unrelated to each other, and unrelated to the Daoist. But when I followed the trail Lu Qinzhou provided, I discovered that all 3 were ultimately funded, albeit through several layers of intermediaries, by the same parent company. And that parent company was registered under the name of a woman I traced to be Daoist Xuanzhen's biological younger sister. There it was. The reservoir where all the water collected. Their trick was actually very classic. So classic I had seen dozens of similar cases in my career. The Daoist decrees the family is cursed and must hold rituals. The terrified family spends money. The money is used to buy offerings at exorbitant prices from companies secretly backed by the Daoist's own family. The massive difference between the real price and the recorded price flows through shell companies right back into his pocket. The more afraid the family was, the more rituals they held, and the richer he got. Other people's fear was his gold mine. I now had the thread connecting the cash flow to the Daoist, but I was still missing one link. The evidence showing Yiting's involvement. Because I knew for a fact she wasn't innocent. A Daoist, no matter how cunning, couldn't single-handedly reach deep into the family's internal affairs to manipulate things like business contracts. Without an insider helping him, it was impossible. And that insider could be no one else but Yiting. Before I had time to search, Yiting came to me herself. She must have smelled that I had been a little too diligent with the ledgers lately. So the next afternoon, she visited the study, bringing 2 cups of tea and her familiar, sweet, fake smile. Cousin, you're working so hard. These incense ledgers are so dry, why exhaust yourself taking on so much? She put the tea down and casually dropped a sentence. Oh, by the way, I have a slight issue with one expense. For the next ritual, the Daoist requested a large sum to bring down a special statue from the mountain. But it was too rushed, we haven't done the paperwork yet. Since you're so good with the books, why don't you just write that expense in for me, so I don't have to go through the hassle of submitting it to the board? We sisters should help each other out, right? It sounded like a friendly request for a favor. But I recognized it immediately as a trap, and a fairly clever one at that. If I obediently recorded that phantom expense in the ledger as she asked, my own signature, my own handwriting, would be attached to a fraudulent transaction. Later, when things blew up, I would be the first one dragged out because I was the one who wrote it down. She wanted to turn me from an investigator into an accomplice. A move designed to push me into the mud so that if I ever tried to accuse anyone, the mud would splash all over me too. A rookie facing this trap would probably panic and refuse outright. But refusing outright means missing a golden opportunity. Because this trap, if handled correctly, could be entirely reversed to catch the very person who said it. So, I pretended to hesitate for a moment, then nodded. All right, sisters should help each other out. But this is a large sum. If I'm going to record it, I have to do it according to procedure. Otherwise, if the board asks later, it will be trouble for both of us. Just sign this internal expense request form, clearly stating that you proposed it, and then I'll enter it into the ledger. It's only valid with your signature, otherwise I don't dare write it down. Yiting hesitated for a fraction of a second, but she was in a hurry, and she was smug, thinking she had successfully lured me into her snare. She assumed an internal request form was no big deal, that no one would notice. So she took the pen and scribbled her signature onto the request form for the phantom expense, then pushed it back to me with a satisfied look. Thanks, cousin. You really know your place. She walked away, completely unaware of what she had just left behind. I looked at the request form bearing her signature, and for the first time in days, I truly smiled. She thought she had just slipped my signature onto a dirty expense. But in reality, she had just personally signed her own name onto an expense that I could prove was fake, non-existent, and fraudulent. That statue supposedly requested from the mountain? I only needed one phone call to find out if it existed and what its real price was. And the signature confirming the proposal for that expense was now safely in my hands, bearing the exact name Xin Yating. I had the missing link, not by searching for it, but because she delivered it right to my door. That night, I put everything together. The money flowing from the family's purse, through the rituals, to the 3 exorbitantly priced suppliers, and finally into the Taoist's relatives' company. Yating's signature proposing the phantom expense. The timestamp of the email that ruined the contract. Everything began interlocking into a complete chain. There was one more thing I asked Chinjo to do. Something so discreet that even he told me not to speak of it prematurely. A complete copy of the dossier was quietly transferred to exactly where it needed to go. Because I understood that evidence in my hands is just evidence. But evidence placed in the right place, at the right time, becomes a trap. As for when to spring it, I wasn't in a hurry. I saved it. But just as I thought I had the entire board under control, the Taoist launched a preemptive strike. The next morning, he summoned all 4 great families. And with an unprecedentedly solemn face, he announced something that shook the entire household. Through several nights of observing celestial phenomena, he discovered that the Shin family's misfortune had reached its most critical point. In 3 days, on the night of the full moon, it would be a matter of life and death. If a massive exorcism ritual wasn't performed, the entire empire would collapse, and the old master's life would be in grave danger. And that grand ritual, he decreed, would require an astronomical sum of money, many times larger than all previous rituals combined. The family was in an uproar. In their fear, no one was rational enough to ask why it had to be exactly 3 days, or why it required so much money. They only saw that the old master was sick, the empire was tottering, and a Taoist they revered was telling them there was only one way to survive. I instantly understood this was his all-in move. He had sniffed out that I was getting too close. Instead of giving me time to cast my net, he decided to haul in one massive catch and withdraw, scooping up the last bit of money in a single gamble. The grand exorcism ritual was the perfect excuse to drain the family's coffers dry in one night. But as the meeting dispersed, Chinjo discreetly pulled me into a corner. For the first time, his face showed genuine worry. He lowered his voice. "Miss Vivi, you need to be careful about this. I just heard from the servants. During the full moon exorcism ritual, the Taoist has arranged a special segment. He said that to eradicate the evil at its root, the person carrying the heaviest ominous aura in the house must be brought onto the altar to be cleansed." He looked straight into my eyes. "According to what he's been saying these past few days, the person with the heaviest ominous aura is you." I fell silent for a moment. So their plan wasn't just to grab the money and run. They intended to use this grand ritual to deal with me permanently. Bringing me onto the altar while the entire family was in their most panicked and fanatical state, they could do whatever they wanted to me under the holy guise of exorcism. By then, no matter how much evidence I held, no one would listen to someone the whole family believed to be the embodiment of disaster. 3 days. I only had 3 days. I looked down at the files in my hands. The cash flows, the signatures, the timestamps I had painstakingly gathered. Enough to accuse, but not enough to win. If I didn't choose the exact right time and right way to release it, one day too early, and they would destroy the evidence and accuse me of slander. One moment too late, and I'd already be on the altar. A stage was being set for the full moon night. The Taoist thought it was a stage for him to collect his final payout and eliminate me. I looked out the window, where people were starting to carry large pillars into the courtyard to build the altar, and a very calm thought emerged in my mind. Fine. You want a massive stage, with all 4 families present to witness? Then I'll let you build it as grand as you want. Because once you invite all 4 families to watch your performance, I will have enough of an audience to watch me expose you. The altar you build to take me down. I will turn it into the place where you step up and fall. Only 3 days to prepare. But 3 days for someone used to racing against audit deadlines is more than enough. The 3 days passed in the blink of an eye, but for me, every hour was calculated as carefully as an item in a ledger. While the whole family was busy preparing for the grand ritual, too afraid and fanatical to pay attention to a granddaughter quietly doing the boring job of bookkeeping, I secretly completed the final link in the chain. I asked Shinjo, in his capacity as legal counsel, to verify a few things that only someone in the legal profession could access. And I did one thing I had been saving up for days, not rushing to act on. I went looking for the talisman. From my very first night in the manor, I had noticed a yellow talisman pasted right behind the ancestral tablet on the main altar in the grand hall. The Taoist claimed it was the most sacred house-protecting talisman, strictly forbidding anyone from touching it. People respectfully stayed away from it. But I found it strange. Why guard a normal house-protecting talisman so heavily? Why forbid people from getting close? People only guard things that hide secrets. So, the night before the grand ritual, when the whole house was asleep, I quietly went down to the grand hall. Under the dim light of the altar, I carefully peeled the talisman off to look at it. And I understood why it was guarded so closely. The front had the same squiggly talismanic scribbles as any other. But when I flipped it over, under the yellow paper, there was a small, intricately printed black and white square. A QR code for bank transfers. The kind of code where you just scan it with your phone, and money automatically flows out. Someone had hidden it right behind the ancestral tablet, in the most solemn place, protected by the very reverence of the entire family. No one dared to touch the ancestral tablet, so no one discovered that every time they worshipped, every time the descendants knelt before the altar, there was a hidden financial conduit operating silently behind that sacred facade. I used my phone to take a clear picture of the talisman and the QR code, then put everything exactly back in its place, careful not to leave a single trace. Now, I had the cash flows, the signatures, the timestamps, and even the transfer code hidden behind a divine shell. Every piece of the puzzle was safely in my hands. All I needed was the stage. And the stage for the full moon night was lit. The grand exorcism ritual was held with unprecedented grandeur. In the middle of the manor's large courtyard, a high altar was erected, brightly lit with candles, smoke from incense billowing. The elders of all 4 great families, Shin, Liu, Meng, and Pei, were fully assembled. Every face was tense and reverent. Old Master Shin was helped out to sit in the center seat, his face pale. He believed tonight was the night that decided the life and death of his entire empire. Poor man. He didn't know that tonight was indeed the deciding night, just not in the way he thought. Taoist Xuanzhen, draped in his most magnificent robes, stood on the altar like a living saint. He began the ritual with long, drawn-out incantations and majestic gestures, making the crowd below hold their breath in awe. I had to admit he was a master actor. If I didn't know his true nature, I might have been swept up in the sacred atmosphere he created too. Then he stopped, swept a solemn gaze over the crowd, and spoke in a booming voice. Esteemed guests, the Shin family's misfortune has reached its most critical point tonight. This poor monk has exhausted all magical power, but the evil aura within this manor is too strong. It cannot be dissolved by normal rituals. Because that evil aura does not come from the outside, it comes from someone within this very family. The crowd buzzed, and as if prearranged, his eyes, along with Yating's, who stood nearby, simultaneously locked onto me. The one carrying that evil aura, the Taoist declared loudly, is the one who calls herself a lucky charm. But since the day she returned, she has sown discord, caused contracts to fail, and made the old master fall ill. To save the Shin family, tonight we must bring her onto the altar so this poor monk can use his power to expel the evil aura from her body. This is the only way. Several burly men, stationed in advance, immediately moved toward me. The terrified crowd shrank back. In their eyes at this moment, I was no longer a human being, but the embodiment of a disaster that needed to be eradicated. Fear had turned normal people into a fanatical mob, ready to do anything. Of course, no one intended to harm me right in front of all four families. What the Taoist needed was just to put on a performance chilling enough to make the whole family believe I was a disaster. Bring me onto the altar, let him dance around expelling the evil aura, and then declare the curse broken. After tonight, I would bear that disgraceful title and pack myself out of the manor, having no face left to stay and investigate. That was what he truly wanted. This was exactly the moment the Taoist had calculated. He had put me in a position with no way out, right when the entire family was at their most deluded, so no one would be rational enough to listen to me. But he forgot one thing. He had personally gathered all four great families here, lighting the area brightly for everyone to witness. He thought he was building a sacrificial altar to sacrifice me. He didn't know he had just built me a perfect stage. I didn't resist when those men approached. I simply stepped up a few stairs of the altar calmly, standing right in the center of the lights where all eyes converged. Then I turned to look down at the crowd and spoke, my voice not trembling in the slightest. The Taoist says I carry an evil aura harming the family. Fine. Before you bring me up to the altar for exorcism, I only ask for one thing. Let me say my final words. Doesn't someone about to be eradicated have the right to say their last words? The request was so reasonable that the Taoist couldn't refuse in front of all four families, lest he reveal a look of fear. He waved his hand and sneered, certain that whatever a girl about to be put on the altar said would just be a futile struggle. Fine, I will let you speak and see what you can defend yourself with. I nodded in thanks and began. But I did not defend myself. I didn't say a single word about evil auras or bad luck. I started with a very mundane question. Our family has spent a lot of money on rituals these past few days. I wonder if any of the elders ever questioned where all that offering money went. The crowd was bewildered. The out-of-place question amidst the exorcism atmosphere left them confused. The Taoist frowned, but before he could stop me, I continued quickly and clearly. I have been the one recording the ritual ledger these past few days, so I know that all the expensive offerings were bought from 3 suppliers. Those 3 sell at prices 5 times higher than the actual market price. And all 3, despite having different names, belong to the same parent company. The owner of that parent company. I paused for a beat, looking straight at the Taoist, is the biological younger sister of Taoist Master Xuanjin here. The entire courtyard fell silent for a second, then erupted into whispers. The Taoist's expression changed, and he hastily shouted, "Nonsense! This brat carrying the evil aura is trying to frame this poor monk to escape punishment. Everyone, do not listen to her. Whether I'm speaking nonsense or not, just look at the documents and it will be clear." I cut him off and signaled. From the crowd, Lu Qinzhou stepped forward, holding the legal files in his hands. His voice was calm and carried the weight of a legal professional. I am the family's legal counsel. I confirm that the registration records of these 3 companies and their ownership connection to the Taoist's family member are all real. They can be publicly verified. If my previous words were a stone thrown into a lake, Qinzhou's confirmation was a massive boulder. Because Qinzhou was an outsider, a lawyer, he had no reason to frame anyone. All 4 families began looking at the Taoist with completely different eyes. But I didn't stop. I knew an old fox like him still had ways to deny it, so I unleashed the next move. That's not all. Some might ask, who inside the family assisted in letting these exorbitant expenses slip through the ledger without the board noticing? I pulled out the expense request form and held it high for everyone to see. This is an expense request form for a statue allegedly requested from the mountain. A statue that I called to verify, and it does not exist at all. A phantom expense. And the person who signed to propose this phantom expense. I turned my eyes toward Yiting. Is Shin Yiting? Yiting turned pale, took a step back, and stammered. No. No. You forced me to sign. You tricked me. I tricked you into signing a phantom expense? I looked at her, my voice still gentle, but every word was like a knife. You say I tricked you, which means you admit that the expense is a phantom one, right? If it were real, then your signature would be part of your proper duties, so how could you be tricked? Choose. 1. It's a real expense and your signature is valid. 2. It's a phantom expense, and you signed it knowing perfectly well it was fake. Either way, you have already admitted your involvement. Yiting was tongue-tied, her mouth open but unable to utter a single word. She had been backed into a corner by her own defense. By this point, Daoist Xuanzhen's face had turned pale. But exactly as I anticipated, a seasoned schemer like him would never accept dying together with someone else. He immediately changed his strategy. Instead of continuing to deny it, he suddenly pointed at Yiting, his voice full of fake indignation. So that's how it is. This poor monk finally understands. So all this time, it was her, Shin Yiting, who used this poor monk's name to commit fraud, embezzling the family's money without my knowledge. I only handle spiritual matters. The money was entirely managed by her. Everyone, this poor monk is also a victim of manipulation. This move was truly masterful. In just one sentence, he shifted all the blame onto Yiting, turning himself into an innocent Daoist whose name was used by evil people. If it were a normal investigation, he might have gotten away with it, leaving Yiting to bear the brunt. Yiting turned to him in horror, realizing she had just been sold out by her own accomplice. But she had no evidence to drag him down with her. The courtyard swayed again, many began to believe the Daoist's words, thinking he was merely being used. I let him act out his entire performance. Then, I leisurely spoke. And this was the blow I had saved for last. The Daoist says he does not touch money, only spiritual matters. Splendid. Then may I ask, the house-protecting talisman that the Daoist personally pasted behind the ancestral tablet, forbidding everyone from touching it, who pasted it there? The Daoist froze. It was this poor monk. But that is a sacred house-protecting talisman, what does it have to do with this? It has everything to do with it. I raised my phone, zoomed in on the photo I took last night, and showed it to the nearest elders before passing it around. Because the back of that sacred talisman, which the Daoist pasted with his own hands, is not a spell, it is a bank transfer QR code. Every time the descendants kneel and worship before the altar, right behind the ancestral tablet, money is silently flowing through this code. The Daoist says he does not touch money, so may I ask who pasted this transfer code in the most solemn place of the family, protected by your own prohibition so no one would dare discover it? The crowd shuddered. The talisman they had revered for days turned out to be a money-sucking pipe disguised by holiness. The outrage over being deceived right in front of the ancestral altar was even greater than the loss of money. This time, the Daoist couldn't blame it on Yiting. I spoke, my voice turning cold. Because you yourself forbade everyone from getting near it, only you could have pasted it there. You say you only handle spiritual matters? This entire spiritual operation of yours, from start to finish, is just a money-printing machine painted with divinity. Daoist Xuanzhen stood rooted to the spot on the altar, his face going from pale to ashen, stiff as a stone statue. The majestic aura of a living saint from earlier had completely vanished, exposing underneath it nothing but a scammer caught red-handed, without a single word left in his defense. All the layers of schemes he had built up now collapsed entirely before a chain of evidence he had no way to deny. But he still hadn't given up. In his desperation, a ferocious glint flashed in his eyes. He knew he was finished, and for someone like him, when finished, he only thinks of a way to run. He quickly glanced toward the back gate, calculating an escape route. While the whole family was still in shock, I saw right through his intention, and I unleashed the final blow. The blow I had secretly prepared over the last 3 days. Taoist master, don't waste your effort looking at the gate. My words made him startle and turn back. Out there, the financial investigation authorities have been waiting since this afternoon. I transferred the entire dossier regarding the shell company's cash flows and that talisman to them 2 days ago. Tonight, you built this altar to gather the final haul and flee. But I actually let you build this altar, so that everyone present here could witness your arrest. Right at that moment, several people in plainclothes walked in through the gate, presenting their badges. The Taoist stumbled backward, his legs turning to jelly, finally collapsing onto the altar, completely devoid of the divine aura of the living saint from earlier. The entire courtyard erupted in an uproar, but amidst the chaos, I turned back to old Master Shin, who had been sitting in stunned silence all this time. I stepped down from the altar, walked over to him, and for the first time since returning to the manor, my voice softened. Grandpa, I'm sorry for hiding this from you, but I had to. Because I knew you were being manipulated by them, and if I spoke too soon, you wouldn't have believed me, and that man would have had time to destroy the evidence. I paused for a moment. I didn't come back here to be a lucky charm or a jinx. I am an auditor. And the truth is, the person who invited me to investigate the abnormal cash flows in the house, long before I knew I was your biological granddaughter, was you. I paused again. You secretly sent a letter inviting an auditor to review the books because you had a premonition that something was wrong. But the Taoist sniffed it out. Instead of letting me walk into the house as an investigator, he acted faster. He cast a hexagram and announced he had found a highly blessed woman of legitimate bloodline, which was me. It was a move that killed 2 birds with 1 stone. He dragged me right in front of him to control me, while making the whole family believe I was his pawn, not the person coming to expose him. And you were sick, surrounded by people pouring anxieties into your ears, so you completely forgot the letter you had sent. Old Master Shin stared at me in stunned silence, his aged eyes brimming with tears, like a man just waking up from a long nightmare. He tremblingly grabbed my hand, his lips moving for a long time before he could speak. Vivi, my child. Grandpa. Grandpa was so foolish. I held his thin, trembling hand tightly. All around us, the candles of the grand exorcism altar were still burning brightly. But the true evil that needed expelling tonight had finally been expelled, not by spells, but by a chain of evidence and a clear head. Only, as I looked at Yiting slumped in a corner, her face vacant, I knew the story wasn't truly over. Because there was a truth about her that, until this moment, even I hadn't managed to see. And that truth would only be revealed the next day. The next morning, the Shin Manor was strangely quiet. The grand altar from last night had been dismantled early, leaving only a few streaks of melted wax on the brick floor, like the residue of a nightmare that had just faded. Taoist Xuanjin had been taken away in the night. Along with him went a whole chain of shell companies, fake ledgers, and a divine mask that had fallen off, never to be worn again. I woke up early, went down to the study, and began doing what an auditor should do immediately after a case closes, cleaning up the numerical crime scene. I sat down to review all the cash flow that had been siphoned off over the past few months since the Taoist set foot in the manor. The final number made even me frown. A massive sum had been gouged out of the family's purse under the guise of breaking curses, enough to feed several villages for years. But what bothered me most that morning wasn't the money, but Yiting. Last night, amidst all the evidence being exposed, I had read the reactions of almost everyone in the courtyard. Only Yiting left me with a question mark. When she was sold out by the Taoist, her face didn't just show the fear of an accomplice being caught, there was something else in it. A shattered look. The kind of shattered look of someone who just realized they were betrayed by the very person they trusted. That didn't align with my image of a greedy, mastermind fake heiress. So that morning, I went to her room. Yiting was huddled by the window, devoid of any trace of the elegant young miss she used to be. Seeing me enter, she gave a bitter, mocking smile. You came to gloat over my ruin, didn't you? Fine, you won. I admit defeat. I didn't come to watch you fail. I pulled up a chair and sat opposite her. I came because there's an account I haven't reconciled yet. And I hate leaving the books with an unreconciled account. She looked up at me, bewildered. Last night, when the Taoist pushed all the blame onto you, you could have confessed everything you knew about him to save yourself. But you didn't. You just sat there and took the hit. I looked straight into her eyes. A greedy mastermind would bite back until the bitter end. But you gave up, like someone who is used to being betrayed. So I'm curious, Yiting. What hold did he have over you that made you willingly act as his pawn for so long? Yiting went silent for a very long time. Then, like a string pulled too tight that finally snaps, she burst into tears. And she told me her story. It turned out she wasn't a biological relative of the Shen family. Everyone knew that. But what no one knew was that years ago, Taoist Xuanzhen, back when he was an unknown monk, picked her up after a natural disaster when she was an orphan child. He raised her, fed her, and educated her, but not out of kindness. He raised her the way one raises a pawn. He taught her how to speak, how to act like a young lady, and then planted her in the Shen family years ago to be his eyes, ears, and extended hand on the inside. She knew everything she did was wrong, but he was the only person she had in the world. And he always told her that if she didn't obey, she would go back to being a helpless orphan. The fear of being abandoned had tied her down, just as the fear of bad luck had tied down this entire family. I listened to everything without interrupting. And when she finished, I understood one thing. The Taoist didn't just manipulate gullible old people with the fear of superstition, he also manipulated an orphan child with the fear of loneliness. The same tactic, just a different target. Yiting was an accomplice, yes, but she was also his first and longest suffering victim. You did wrong, so you must take responsibility, I said, my voice not softening, but not cruel either. The phantom expense you signed, you will have to declare it fully to the authorities. No one can bear that for you. But if you confess everything you know about his network, that is a mitigating factor. And after you pay your price, you still have your whole life ahead to live as a free person, not a pawn. I stood up. Being abandoned isn't as scary as spending your whole life being a tool for someone else while thinking they are your safe haven. You're smart enough to understand that. Yiting looked up at me, her eyes brimming with tears, but for the first time, holding a different kind of light. She nodded slightly. I left her room, closing the final account in my ledger. It wasn't an acquittal, but it wasn't a crushing blow either. Because I understood, striking down an evil person isn't hard. The hard part is not letting yourself become another version of the cruelty you just defeated. In the days that followed, the Shen Manor began cleaning up the mess the Taoist left behind. And this was when my true identity proved its worth. I sat down with the board of all 4 families, laid out all the books, and did what I do best. I tracked down every penny that had been gouged from the safe, following their trail through the shell companies. And with Lu Qinzhou's legal support, we recovered the vast majority of the embezzled funds. Not only that, I also discovered that the skewed asset allocation plan I had pointed out at the very first banquet was part of the same conspiracy. The Taoist and his cronies had deliberately skewed it to siphon off even more. I recalculated everything, returning fairness to every branch of the family, even the small, vulnerable branches that had been suffering losses without realizing it. When I presented the final report, the entire board of the 4 families fell silent. Not because of the numbers, but because they realized that what they had spent months seeking through rituals, spells, and pleading with the gods, only required a clear head and a clean set of ledgers to solve. Old Master Shen's health recovered rapidly after the grand ritual night. It turned out the illness that had been weakening him was partly caused by people whispering in his ear, sowing so much anxiety that he couldn't eat or sleep. When the fear was removed, his physical self lightened up as well. One afternoon, he called me out to the garden, held my hand, and spoke with the voice of a true grandfather. Vivi. I've been in business my whole life, thinking myself wise and sharp. Yet at the end of my life, I was almost scammed out of my entire empire by a piece of paper. I always thought a family's blessing was bestowed by heaven, blessed by the gods. Now I understand, the greatest blessing of this family turned out to be having a granddaughter like you. I smiled and shook my head. Grandpa, I'm not some lucky charm. I'm just a person who knows how to read numbers. The true blessing of our family doesn't lie in me, nor in any talisman. It lies in the family's willingness to believe in what can be seen and measured, instead of believing in fear. A family that knows how to value truth over deities is already a blessing in itself. Hearing this, the old master burst into laughter. It was his first hearty, resounding laugh since the day I returned to the manor. As for the recovered funds, I didn't keep them for myself. Even though, with my status as the legitimate heiress, I had every right to. I proposed to the old master, and he agreed immediately to set aside a large portion to establish a scholarship fund. That fund was dedicated to the poor children in the very countryside where I grew up. The place where an orphan girl like me once had to struggle so hard just to go to school, to acquire the profession and the knowledge that saved this entire family that night. I set only one condition for it: this fund would only help children who were willing to study properly. Because I believe that if you give a poor child a fish, they are full for a meal. But if you give them literacy, for their entire life they will never have to fear any talisman from any scammer. That is the true way to eradicate evil at its root. Not with an altar, but with knowledge. The day the scholarship fund was officially established, I returned to my old hometown myself. The dirt road I used to wade through the mud to get to school was still there. The children in the village gathered around to look at me, their eyes filled with a mix of unfamiliarity and timidity. Exactly like my own eyes when I was a child, whenever I looked at people returning from the big city. I sat down and talked to them. Not with the voice of a family heiress, but with the voice of someone who had grown up on this very land. I told them something simple, that poverty is not scary. What's scary is when people are poor and believe their fate is already predetermined. That only through praying and sheer luck can their lives be changed. I told them the only thing no one can rob from them, something no talisman, no prophecy can deceive, is the knowledge in their heads. An old woman in the village, who used to give me a bowl of rice in the days after my mother died, held my hand tearfully. She said that in the past, the whole village thought that the studious orphan girl would just suffer her whole life anyway. I smiled and told her that it was exactly because I loved to study that I didn't suffer. My blessing, it turned out, was sown by the villagers from those very days. Now I was just sowing it back for other children. Hearing that, the honest country folks just laughed. A gentle and warm laugh, completely different from the calculating smiles I always saw in the bustling city. I realized that taking revenge on an evil person only closes a past chapter, but lifting a child up opens an entire future. The latter is what's truly worth doing. A few months later, on a peaceful afternoon, Lu Chinzhou came looking for me. Throughout the past months, he had been the one fighting by my side in all the asset recovery efforts. He was the only person who believed in me from the beginning, back when the whole family still called me a jinx. He wasn't the flamboyant type. He spoke little, and every sentence he uttered was as solid as a contract clause. But it was exactly that upright certainty that made me feel I could trust him. He didn't bring flowers, nor did he speak sweet words. He merely placed a file on the desk in front of me. "What is this?" I asked. "The incorporation documents for an independent auditing firm," he said, his voice as calm as ever, but there was a warmth in the corners of his eyes that wasn't usually there. "I think with your mind and my profession, we can help more than just one family. Out there are still many people being deceived by different kinds of talismans." He paused for a moment, then added more softly, "And I also want a legitimate reason to be able to work next to you every day." I looked at him, then at the file. In my profession, I always taught myself to suspect offers that looked too beautiful. But this offer wasn't flawlessly beautiful. It was practical, clear, and solid. Just like the man himself. It didn't promise a soaring, romantic love. It offered companionship, and I realized that was exactly what suited me. I picked up a pen, flipped the file open, and signed my name on it. Not the signature of a Lucky Charm or an heiress, but the signature of Shinwei, auditor. Deal, I said, looking up at him, my lips curving into my first genuine smile in days. But let me warn you, my audits are very strict, even with my own partners. Chinjo burst into laughter. And for the first time, I saw his rigid, calm demeanor melt into something warm. That afternoon, I stood by the study window looking out at the Shin Manor's garden. The place where, a few months ago, an altar had been built to sacrifice me. Now, it was lushly green and peaceful. I thought about the entire journey that had passed. The day I walked through these gates, they brought me back like a talisman. A feng shui object expected to bring luck through some sort of mysticism. In the end, I truly did bring a blessing to this family. But that blessing didn't come from an astrological chart. It didn't come from a prosperous fate, nor from anything divine. It came from the sleepless nights of studying of a poor child. From the years of tirelessly honing the craft of scrutinizing every number. From a mind willing to stay awake and clear when everyone else was panicking. People keep searching for a lucky charm far and wide, in spells, in prophecies, in the invisible, forgetting that the truest, most enduring lucky charm does not lie outside the body. It lies right inside each person's clear head. As long as you keep it, no matter how many talismans you encounter, how many prophecies you hear, or how many people want to turn you into a pawn, you will always be the one deciding your own chessboard. And that is the true lucky charm. The end.